welcome to this webinar. Okay, I am the host, Eduardo Bobsin. I have here with me David Anderson, creator of the Kanban method, leader of the Kanban community, Dragos Dumitriu, who is a known name for everyone who has um, attended the KMP training, yeah, known as KMP1 from the XIT case study, and Peter Kirschbaumer, right? So, hello, thanks for joining. And I would like to say a few words, introducing ourselves for those who don't know, right? Before we begin. David?
I thought you were
You
going
say
to
hi?
introduce yourself, Eduardo.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I just introduced, but if you like to say something else. Well, I would like then to start with a nice question that is the theme of this webinar. We are celebrating here 20 years of the first Kanban case, that is the XIT at Microsoft. And well, David was there along with Dragos. And I would like to start with something interesting then from the backstories. How did you two meet each other? How was the context and how it all started?
I think Dragos should tell that story.
Yeah, I didn't bring the book with me, but I've had it. It's actually on my desk at home. I was reading a book about agile management, written by a guy named David Anderson. I was working at Microsoft. I was in the office, and I had, even like 20 years ago, the book is actually on my desk at home because yesterday the five, six of us have talked in preparation for this. But 20 years ago, it was on my
It
desk at
was
Microsoft, and I
21
was
years ago, right? It's
21
20,
years ago. Yeah,
yeah,
21 years
because
ago.
what we're doing now is celebrating that you reported the results. So yeah,
Yeah, and
it was 2004.
yeah, and I was still I was reading the book the first time, and all of a sudden, an email flies by on my laptop in one of the groups I was part of, saying that David Anderson will talk about theory of constraints. And I'm like, initially, I thought there's something in my head that was wrong. Like I have a book on my desk, David Anderson, and then I see this email. So right away, I look in the Microsoft directory. I find the David Anderson. Someone picks up the call at the other end, and I said, "Hey, it's so funny. Your name is David Anderson, and you're going to have this seminar about theory of constraints." And I'm reading a book called Agile Management, um, written by a guy, David Anderson, and the other person responds, "Well, it is me, and David Anderson." And I said, "Yeah, I know who you are. I called you, but I'm saying is there's this other character, this other fellow who wrote the book." And the person at the other end of the call says, "No, no, no, I am the one who wrote that book you are reading." I'm like, "Okay, judging by the accent, you likely are. You know what? What building are you in? I'm coming over." So I, within 15 minutes, we met for the first time.
Yeah, I recall that I was giving a talk at, I don't know, it was some local meetup group,
SIQ,
but it
SIQ,
was it
yeah,
was hosted across I guess it was on your side of the freeway, but
yeah.
it was at it was the Honeywell office, and yeah, I guess the local sort of quality assurance meetup thing. And afterwards, you came up to me. We'd had the phone call, and then you came up to me and said that you had volunteered to run the department in the IT group at Microsoft with the worst customer service record, and you thought that I might be able to help you. So we arranged for me to come over to your office a few days later, and that's how we got started. So yeah, we didn't know each other before that, right? Dragos got a hold of my book somehow, and then realized that I was working in the same company, just on
I
the
didn't
other
even pay
side.
for it. It was actually on someone else's desk. And I happen to have been through Scrum training, I think, or anyway, I was looking at Agile, and Agile was not even allowed in those days. So, back then we all had offices at Microsoft. So it wasn't someone's book. I'm like, what's up with this? Agile management
Yeah.
as a title. That's all I saw. And he says, feel free to take it and browse through it. It's just something I picked up, and I don't know where he picked it up. And that's how I ended up with the book. And the theory of constraints was well described. Yeah, that's
So
one
yeah,
one
I
one
need to
unplanned
interrupt us
event
for a
after.
minute.
Yeah, sorry.
I noticed a message scrolling past that someone has an AI agent transcribing the webinar, and we don't allow people to reproduce the webinar in any shape or form. If you're streaming this anywhere else, that's not permitted. Um, the Eduardo's taken over from Diana Deriajna as our usual webinar host, so we haven't stated that. If you've got an AI bot transcribing this, if you use it for anything other than immediate personal use, we'll come after you. I'm sorry, but it, they you really need to ask permission if you're going to do stuff like that.
Dragos, you mentioned the other day something about the Three Musketeers story. Can you say something about it?
Yeah, it's interesting because David started with a similar thread saying, hey, it's been 20 years. We should do something about it. We should have a call. I'm like, yeah, sounds like an Alexandre Dumas novel, one of my favorites. Actually, yeah, I read it, and I read it in French at the time. I was fluent, I think, by the time I was in 8th grade in French, and I was going to French Olympics, where you had to write 3-hour essays. And Alexandre Dumas was obviously not only a required reading, but I was very passionate about it. An author is an author, right? So I read all the books, and all the Three Musketeers were fantastic. And it's funny. It's been 20 years, and just like in the Three Musketeers, they just got better. They're just solving different challenges. They're dealing, there's still a lot of adventures ahead of them, and it's the same here now. It's the same feeling. I'm still doing what I used to do, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but at a completely different level. And it's not a matter of better or worse. It's a matter of learning and trying to find answers to challenges that are nonetheless interesting and haven't been solved before. Yeah.
Great. And you mentioned something about the new context that was managing the XIT team and understanding what was happening. Can you tell a little bit more what happened when you arrived, Dragos?
Yeah, initially, so I saw the position posted, and I was in a minute with in a meeting with senior managers, and I said, "Hey, I noticed this position, and it looks like an interesting challenge." And then everybody dismissed it. It's like, no, it's not. It's not for you. It's boring and doesn't work very well. This team couldn't really get things done. And I said, "Wow!" I said that sounds even more interesting. And finally, I get this role, I get this position, and shortly thereafter, I'm on a plane to Hyderabad, India, where we've had some of the first teams at Microsoft. Um, People I was working with, they were TCS contractors, and it's funny because also this week I was on a call with a different customer with TCS folks being system implementers, and I had to tell them there are people from Hyderabad. I'm like, yep, I've been in your office exactly about 20 years ago. So it's funny how things work. But initially, I met with the team, and the picture that David has since his first book, I think it was a black and white picture that now it's in color in the newer books. That is actually a picture with the team in Hyderabad, my second day there, and everybody's smiling, and we just got kind of to meet. We just ate together, we just had lunch together, and in the back of my mind was this ask like, just go and build a different team because these people can't deliver anything. And I think within 9 months, in about 9 months, we were doing about 5 times more work, 5 times faster. And most people, like Sridhar right now, who's a program manager, he's a director. He's still with TCS. He runs very large engagements. So, and everybody progressed and developed really well. So we had a really, really good time. The challenge was initially, I didn't even understand how are this. If you look at that picture, my first question is, these people, they seem to know very well what they're doing. I wonder what's going on. Why are they perceived in a different way than, I see them, and I wonder why they can't get anything done. Everything, as a reminder, was taking about 5 months to do, even though we had the mandate to not take more than 30 days on anything we would be working on.
Good. And one part to me that when I teach the case, and it's always there's a famous text about an unknown American writer that every time you read, you'll learn a little bit more about it. I don't recall right now, but
David Anderson, maybe? No, it's not American. But okay, kidding. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, well, yeah, could be. Oh, well, English. And every time I teach about the case, I perceive something, I read and understand the nuances of that. So that derived lots of things on that, like the Kanban implementation, the static approach, and all of that. And one interesting point about the case is the set of constraints at the moment, and what you had to do to improve results given the constraints. Like maybe if the constraints weren't there, you wouldn't stop estimating, but there was a constraint, something like this. Can you tell a little bit about that, the constraints, and how you managed to negotiate with the managers and make them accept the changes, the proposed changes?
So there's an interesting pattern, and that I have seen before, that gave me confidence to follow it at the time 20 years ago, but also a pattern that I have been following ever since for the past 20 years. And that is, and by the way, for about 10 years of the last 20 years, I've done consulting and coaching and worked, I believe, with at least half of Fortune 100 companies and all kinds of companies. So I work with companies, small, big, government, startups, and the patterns they're still there. And the pattern is folks have a challenge or a problem or a complaint. And yet, when you ask them for data points, or you ask them to say, well, show me some evidence that this is happening, and it's not just something in your head or in our heads, or how can we become objective about it, right? So again, we're coming out of this lunch. We've had a really good time. And I have a meeting coming up with the leadership team at TCS in the Hyderabad office to say, to go and request a different team. And instead of going and requesting a different team, I actually asked for more time to get some information. I actually said, some data, and we found out a couple of things to make it short. We found out that we had developers and testers who were spending about 80% of their time sending emails. We found out that 3 developers and 3 testers had somewhere between, ever since they started in this role, they had between 60 and 90 tickets open, right? And typically the work was driven by 3 engineers. So, and then again, we somehow quantified, and I couldn't believe it, that like, wait a minute, 80% of your time you're sending emails. They were getting incomplete requirements. There was a process they had to follow up for creating estimates. So out of that timing, about 30% of their time was spent estimating, right? 50% of their time was spent following up on emails, and 20% of the time was spent pretty much doing dev work, which is not really 20. You're not going to write code even 20% of that time. So hence, it was taking about 5 months to work on things that later on they were done between 5 and 15 days, right? So 9 months later, the same people doing the same work, they deliver 5 times more, 5 times faster, and the customer experience comes from 5 months to a forecasted, or should I say, a predicted approach that these things will take up to 5 days, these things will take about 10 days, and these things will take about 15 days, which was 1, 2, or 3 weeks of work, pretty much, right? Anyway, so I think the answer to that is, how do you know that, what information and what data points do you have? Initially, I didn't have any data. I interviewed every member of the team. I interviewed the leadership team in Redmond. I interviewed leaders at TCS. And that's how we found out in percentages where their time was being spent. Then I went into the tool we are using to track work, and I did further analysis, right?
So you did have
So
data, right? The data
yeah,
was there, but your
there was a
predecessor
lot of
are
data.
not using the
No,
data.
no. Everybody was telling me, we don't have any data. We don't know why it takes them 5 months. And when I looked, I said, I have 200 data points, and I can tell you that most of the times these tickets are in a holding pattern. There are no hands on keyboard doing any code or any testing, and that's kind of how we had to take the available, let's say, data, but transform that into information that you can put in front of people and generate the right action items, if you want.
And this data was in a tool called Product Studio,
Yeah.
Microsoft, which is an internal predecessor of Azure DevOps
Yes.
nowadays. And the interesting thing for me looking back is that it was essentially a maturity level 2 system, right? That it was tracking multiple teams. And Draggers thinks of it as one team, the development, the devs. It tracked the whole workflow. And even today, 20 years later, that's still an unusual situation for us. A lot of people who come through our training are working at companies where they're tracking the individual teams separately. It's all maturity level 1 and team focused implementation in their tooling. And they're actually unable to get this end to end picture without extracting the data from the tool, sending it into some BI tool like Power BI, and piecing it all together so they can have some sort of managerial reports. Well, looking back, Dragos was starting in a maturity level 2 situation. They were lousy at delivery, but they had a defined process, they had it fully instrumented, they had all the data. Nobody was using it, no one was looking at it, no one was thinking about the problem the right way. So, if anything, what we did was just think about the right problem. Customer asked for something, they want to know when they're going to get it. They'd like to get it a hell of a lot faster than had been the case. And we needed to get to the bottom of what the problem was. And my belief coming into it, talking to Dragos, was it's probably not the programmers or the testers. And I think the remarkable thing about all those results are that they were achieved without changing the way that they did the programming or the way they did the testing. We didn't touch that. We let those professionals get on with what they were doing, whichever way they were allowed to be doing it. And we didn't interfere with that. This is purely a management intervention.
It was also very interesting that while this was one of the first teams where we did outsourcing at Microsoft, or at least in India, I mean, we had contractors locally before, but I mentioned 3 developers, 3 testers, a manager of that team. He was a program manager, I was a program manager. But all these requests were coming from customers. And what we realized was that, again, these requests were highly incomplete. So we outsourced that work back to them. Instead of them sending us incomplete information that we had to chase, we put some models, some criteria in place. And I think I don't remember if I had that, David, or we both worked with it. I know we refined it later on, but we said, here is all the information that we need. And if we don't receive this information, we're going to start, we will not start working on it. And the way I sold that to them to push back to say, we're not going to take these requests and come for details. We said, if you want dev to dev and you want test to test, you want faster results and you want more work done quicker, then you need to provide complete information. And 20 years later, we still see these patterns. I don't believe that there's anybody on this call that doesn't receive fuzzy, incomplete requests. And then what happens sometimes, like if you get inundated with such requests, you get paralyzed in the process of clarifying. So we outsource that work back to the customer, if you want. And we said, okay, here is what we need. And
Tightening
we
up the
also
definition of ready.
we also made the prioritization pretty clear. I said, rank yourself, Anyway, and then but that's kind of how we did it. And we ended up with, I think when we look at we didn't use words like flow efficiency back then. But now when we look at that, I think the flow efficiency went from a single digit, from probably below 5% to close to 90%. Again, these are numbers. This is
so
data
you're
that you
right.
should understand.
We weren't using terms like flow efficiency. I wasn't talking about it very much, but was in my head, right? When you showed me the other data, which came out of the Excel, which I believe is the PSP Excel tool, that there was about 11 days of engineering effort and you had 155 days on average.
Yeah.
That was in my head that, okay, only 8% of the time is being spent doing the work. 92% of the time is delays.
Yeah.
Right? I was definitely thinking about that. Now, the thing is that when I heard this 8% number, my reaction in my head was, oh my God, that's so terrible. Well, of course, what we've come to learn in the years since is that if you start at 8% flow efficiency, that's actually quite good. That so much of the market is at a much lower level than that. So you had this, what we would now call a maturity level 2 workflow service delivery. You had 8% flow efficiency, and most of the market's maturity level 1 with 1 or 2% flow efficiency. Now just think about that. Most of the market's 1 or 2% flow efficiency. If you catapult them to as good as XIT was before we even started, you've already improved them by 4 times.
Yeah. And it's not just the improvement around work, but if you think about the quality of life for the people doing the work, back in 2005, many folks in Hyderabad, well, let's say, I think it's fair to say that none of the folks in Hyderabad had conditions to work from home. The Wi-Fi and internet was poor or inexistent, and some of the companies,
campus, right?
Yeah. And I don't even know if they're allowed. I don't remember actually if they were allowed to take the laptops home. I think some of them were able to, but not everybody was able to. Even like if they would take the laptop, they weren't able to conduct all the work from home. So as a result, they were working sometimes 12 or 14 hours because management was not happy with the feedback received from Microsoft and said, oh, you have to work more hours and make a change. And they didn't matter how many hours they were working, they would just keep starting more things. So that was like one of the things that I think I'm not you need to stop starting things, you need to start finishing things, and later on that became stop starting, start finishing.
So I have a question. Where was the Kanban board in all of this?
The what?
Yeah, I was going to ask, there was no
There
Kanban
wasn't
board.
one, right? So it was a virtual Kanban system and with WIP limits. So explain a little bit about how you implemented the WIP limits, something to do with database trigger.
So again, part of the conversation back then was really like people and the stakeholders were not seeing what we were seeing. So I kept coming to this concept of like, I used to do photography, and I said, it's like you take a picture, you take really good pictures of someone or their wedding, And then as a photographer, then you go back to them and you describe to them, I took some really good pictures of you. You were wearing this white dress and you with your tie, and people are like, yeah, fantastic. It's like, but you don't give them any pictures, right? So you give them the picture, you don't need to say anything, you're actually gonna get paid, right? You don't get paid for telling them what you have seen. So I said, we really need to make this tangible and visible. So this concept of visibility and everybody to sit around the table to look at the same thing also kind of that's how it started. So it was an early crude uh, tool we are using internally that I think evolved into SharePoint later on. So I started to create a table there to show kind of, how many things we have in progress. The other thing that we did was to show how 60 to 90 things, keep starting and nothing comes at the other end. It's not productive. So one of the things I had, one of the biggest changes that I have made was to meet with the stakeholders in the same room. Before, I had to meet with each stakeholder one-on-one. And part of the initial process was to get a list of top 10 things from each stakeholder. 5 stakeholders, 5 top 10 things, you end up with 50 things. That's what was driving them to keep starting work. So once I got everybody in one room, I proposed to them that from now on, you can still bring your top 10 things, but you discuss it among yourselves, and you're going to give me 10 things initially, I asked. So out of the 50, you walk into this room, you're going to give me um, um, 10, and they have to be stack ranked, because if there's a security threat or some issue we have to address for security, that's going to take priority versus other things, right? Some enhancements. So again, I outsourced the prioritization process. And once we've done this for 2 or 3 months, we realized that this was working really well. And these people who were like 4 or 5 levels above me in Microsoft, they said, we don't think we need to meet anymore. We trust you now to make the decision. Now you understand our business. So I started to get an better understanding of the 5 different businesses, how to use the prioritization. They didn't push back on 10 things for five people versus 50 things for 5 people. It's part of the success, I think, to make things visible, to present clearly to your stakeholders how they impact each other. Now, if you deal with external paying customers, that's not going to work, because Best Buy doesn't care that you do things for, I don't know, Macy's, right? They're not going to care about each other. But when you have internal stakeholders, this is a really easy problem to solve. Well,
Yeah, and something I had not realized, because in the more recent book, the Discovering Kanban book, I talk about that transition and change that happened at Torbis with the stakeholders, with the vice presidents who came to the replenishment meeting. And once they got this understanding that they had this shared pipe, and if they put something in that pipe, they'd used up some of the capacity. And if, for example, it didn't make it the whole way through, it didn't come out the other end, they're all looking at each other with, well, why didn't you put that in there? Waste the capacity for us. So they realized that they had to have a conversation. So the replenishment meetings would start with one of them asking the project manager, the person in charge of delivery, Diana Colomiers, and they'd say, how long are things taking? And she'd reply something like 30 days, 6 weeks, basically. So they'd look at each other and say, okay, what's the one most important thing the company's doing 6 weeks from now? And let's filter the backlog based on that. Let's just see the things that relate to that one initiative, and then we'll pick some. I didn't realize that you'd essentially achieved that same result. There's a similar situation where you had 4 or 5 external stakeholders from different departments, different parts of the company.
I just wrote something down because I remember, and I want to point out, and I recognize so many names, and of course, Marcello is doing his own thing. Dave White, he's putting order in place, telling Marcello to shut up. Very good, very good. Nothing changed, in 20 years. But one of the things that that I started to tell stakeholders back then was that they kept asking me, here are all the things that you haven't done. So, I go to one meeting, I'm being told about all the things I have. This is before we change prioritization. So I go to another meeting, and again, I'm being put in a corner, all the things we haven't done. I'm like, so then I go with the data and say, well, you know what? We only deliver 9 things a quarter. It's very unlikely that we're going to give you more than 9 things for the next quarter. Actually, they kept giving me 10, 10, 10, but then we modify that to more of a quarterly approach. And then we started to deliver 10 and 20 and 30 and 40, and I think it got close to 50 things per quarter. But something that I said at some point was that this is after the meetings, like after several times, I felt like I was being put in a corner on my knees. Everything the team has not done is because of what the team has been doing, and this team has been doing nothing else but what you have been asking them to do. So again, how do you create that transparency to show what's not being done at the expense of what's being done? And how do you maximize value by making sure that what is being done has the most value for, you name it, your stakeholders, your customers, your,
You
whatever.
brought back the memory that it must be about 20 years ago today, roughly, that you sent me a message saying we've burnt down the backlog, that you got
Yeah,
to zero
we had no
things.
more backlog. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So basically, any request that followed after that was basically
in real
taken
time.
immediately, right?
Real time meaning within a month. Everything all the demand, the same people, the demand never really changed. It slightly went up, but we are able to keep up within 30 days. We would turn around everything that was being asked, and it was a really good feeling. I would say the saddest memory I've had is not related to what the team has been doing. It's about me reading the goal after David finally convinced me to read the book. After he went to that conference, and I think what was it, TOC, Theory of Constraints conference
That
that he
was
went
a
to in
few of those over
Barcelona.
the years, yeah. Well, the
Yeah,
Barcelona one,
yeah,
yeah.
but
I don't
but
know
I was
which year
reading
that
the
was.
goal. I was reading Eliyahu Goldratt's book, The Goal, after we achieved no backlog, right? So at some point in the story, I get to the point in the story where the main character doesn't have a backlog anymore, and I remember instantly throwing the book away and having tears come down my face because I'm like, this should have been required reading in at least in college, if not in high school, for anybody, because what David and I did and the outcomes that this team achieved was literally, if we would
That,
have had the recipe, if everybody would have read the book, this wouldn't have happened anyway.
yeah, that
So,
was
so
management.
Peter has a question about how did you get the management to buy into not estimating? And I know we
That was
talked
the
about it
biggest. That
yesterday
was
in
the
the
biggest
rehearsal.
point, and I would say, so I come from one of the trips to, so this was probably my second or probably second trip to Hyderabad. I come back and I'm presenting in an all hands, and I didn't have much time to prepare. I literally came from the airport. I came straight to the all hands. So from SeaTac, Seattle Tacoma Airport, I come to Microsoft on campus, and I go into a room. There were like over 400 people, and I already sent some slides. I knew I was going to present. My turn comes up. I remember I was in the back getting some snacks after that long airplane, plane ride. And I go on stage and I present some of the findings. And the general manager is asking, so what is one thing that you would change? And I said, well, we need to stop estimating because obviously it's taking a big chunk of time. And he said, no, you're not going to stop estimating. That's a process we put in place. It took us a long time to put the process in place. Okay, great.
Now, just to
So,
be clear, the,
yeah,
the GM was a guy called Dale Christian, who
right.
really became a good friend of ours
Yeah,
after that, right? He went on to have the stellar career, the CIO at Avanade globally, and then the CIO at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. A good
yeah.
guy, right? He he
Exceptional,
wasn't
exceptional
some
individual. Exceptional.
dumbass
Everybody was.
keyboard boss, you know.
Yeah.
Dale was a great guy.
Yeah, and I ended up going. Then I worked for him later on. But I go. So that night I have a meeting, right? Time zone differences, right? So that night, I have a call probably 6, 7 hours after the all hands, And none of the folks in Hyderabad, they're not part of the all hands, right? So I talked to the team, and the team says, so Dragos, what do we do about estimating? I said, good news. You don't have to estimate anymore. And I said, I want you to start. Like I said, I want dev to dev, I want test to test. Leave the estimating to me. Here is the part that I didn't tell the general manager, Dale, and I did a very poor job at communicating to him. So all he heard was, we're gonna stop estimating, and he interrupted me right away, smiling, saying, no, I still remember his face, like, no, you're not. You're not gonna stop estimating. I'm like, okay. In front of 400 people, I'm not gonna argue with someone who's like, he was like 6 or 7 levels above me. So I tell the team, okay, now here is what I didn't tell Dale, and then what I started to do right away. Instead of estimating, which was, by the way, it was taking an engineer about 3 days, I used the over 200 data points that we've had. We started to figure out that, cycle times and lead times, we started to use words like that from lean. And I said, I have a forecast model, so I can predict when something is going to be done. So I told this to my stakeholders. And again, my stakeholders were not in the all hands. None of them were at Dale's level. They probably would have said, no. Dale said you cannot stop. And instead of providing estimates, it was taking me really. I created actually on that SharePoint site like that I've had. I said, if your work falls into this category, it's going to take between this many days and this many days. So you're using a range. It's one of the things that I'm pretty sure this came from David at some point. Instead of using an estimate number, I was using an estimate as a small range. So I said, this is going to take 5 to 8 days, or 5 to 7 days. This is going to take this and that. Anyway, so I started to use forecasting. Again, you cannot do forecasting if you don't have data. And the way I was introducing this model was, how many of you are happy with the weather forecast models? And the 5 stakeholders said, yeah, we are. They're pretty good. They're not always right. And I said, well, I propose that moving forward, we use the same thing. I'm not going to be right all the time, but I'm going to be pretty close most of the times, right? So that's how that was like a big change, because that was after we outsourced the request, right, the demand, and making sure that we get complete requests. The other big bump in developer efficiency, if you want, was to stop them from estimating.
All right, so we have time, about 15 minutes or so, for questions for Dragos, questions about implementing Kanban at an enterprise scale, big companies. Peter has lots of experience also as a transformation leader.
I saw in the chat where was flying a question around about what data how can you import data, right? So you mentioned already the connection with Jira, right? What other ways of getting data are there?
Yeah, good. This is a question from Marcelo. Currently, we have those main connectors, but anything can be integrated later. Just exporting the data into a more raw format, CSV or JSON file, and then import it into the tool. But it's not currently supported, but it's possible, and it's already in the roadmap.
Yeah, there's also an import ability with the flow boards. So at a very basic level, you can export XML from Trello, and it will recreate your Trello board inside flow boards. It has that same concept of a workflow that Eduardo was showing in the flow metrics. So we don't have this as a working functionality to demo today, but we should be able to extract your Jira data from your team level Jira boards, allow someone to piece that together as a workflow, as a maturity level 2 workflow in the flow metrics software, and then reverse engineer the end-to-end enterprise scale Kanban system in the Flowboards software. So we should be able to catapult people from their maturity level 1 hell that they're stuck in into a maturity level 2 to 3 solution, sort of automatically, button pressing.
Good. We have one question to Dragos. Dragos, what are the top 2 challenges you navigated through at XIT?
I think I had to build up the courage to talk to the stakeholders in a way in which I help them understand that the process is the problem, and that coming up with top 10 list of questions from 5 stakeholders every month, that's 50 new things that they want every month, was part of the problem. And I realized that once you start to talk and once you have data that you can show the impact of those actions, right away they'll back out of it. It's like, oh my God, like I didn't realize that this is what the impact that I was creating. So I would say, be honest to yourself and create transparency, and don't rush to say something like I said in front of 400 people, we're going to stop estimating. Just say, hey, we've been using an estimation model for a long time, but now we have forecasts, we have 200 data points. We can use this to forecast. And by doing that, it would save our engineers, 40% of their time to write code instead of estimating, right? So that was part of my growth back then. So looking back, yeah, I would not do that again to go tell a team to do something different than what I agreed with leadership. I just got better at selling that up front to leadership and showing the value. And again, you need data for that. Thank you for asking.
There's one more question here from Paul Rutter. Paul, just clarify if that's for Dragos or David, but I'll read it. What are the most effective metrics you find have the biggest impact on articulating issues with flow when addressing the issues with management? But Dragos, I think it can be you again.
Well, something I said earlier, you need to paint that picture that everything that the team has not done is because of what the team has been doing, and say, is this what you really want? Going back to, again, 20 years ago. What we do, we have built a custom Power BI solution. Again, it's when this, at some point, we've had over 300 engineers in this organization, so we have a lot of data. So we built our own Power BI, and in the beginning we didn't have a portfolio level. We had epics that would be broken down into stories, and like what I've seen earlier in this demo. But we realized that we need to have a portfolio level, and we need to have a portfolio board where you show the big things that go into a release, right? So for us was to show not just like we had to go above this story and epic level, right? Go to the portfolio, go to the highest level of deliverables that you have. And then if someone is not happy, say, well, are we prioritizing, the right things? What else? What would you like to see done instead of what you're doing right now? David?
So the question of the most effective metrics, right? Well, we're not big fans of flow efficiency, generally speaking. But it does actually have a very useful role to play with executives. And sometimes you don't need a lot of data, right? So I was at a meeting with a bunch of quite senior bankers at one of the 2 big banks here in Spain and Madrid, international bank, huge, sort of global top 10 sort of level bank. And I'd asked them what it was they were afraid of. Why were they running some improvement initiative? And they said, well, we're too slow. Okay, too slow at what? They basically said basic banking services and introducing new stuff, time to market for new stuff. We're afraid of all these fintech startups. All right, very good. And I said, okay, basic banking service, opening a new credit card. If I make a credit card application, how long would it take you to process that? And thought about it, and they came back with about 4 weeks, maybe a month. And I said, all right, imagine that the king's private secretary calls you and said the king has a public engagement Tuesday morning next week, and for the purpose of the demonstration in with the companies visiting, he needs a credit card in order to do this demo with the company and the public relations. Could you guys sort them out with a credit card so he can use it during his engagement next week? How long would that take you to make it happen? And they just fell about laughing because they all knew that they could have it done by the end of day. And I said, all right, so if you have an expedite request, you can process it in half a day, but normally it takes a month. Well, you've just learned your flow efficiency. So that's highly motivational for them when they realize that most of the problem is delay. It's not doing the work. And then I follow that with, okay, so delay is your big problem in this organization. Who's in charge of that? Who is your vice president of delay? And again, they all fall about laughing because no one's in charge. Right? So flow efficiency has a real powerful value with executives, but only from the point of view that it tells you the problem you're trying to solve. Right? So I love flow efficiency for that purpose, but as a general sort of improvement driver, it's not very useful. Do we have anything else?
Yeah. One last question from Helmik. Dragos, if you could have done something different at XIT, your biggest regret, what was that?
I read the question online.
Okay.
No regrets was my first answer. It was a fantastic journey, a fantastic trip. No regrets, not even like the mistakes I made. I learned from them. I learned a lot from them, so I wasn't afraid. And then she's asking any old stuntman stories to share. Well, I don't know what's more of a
You've got 1
stuntman.
minute for a stuntman story.
I don't know what's more, what's better of a stuntman story than to tell to someone who's 5 levels above you, that's pretty much considered God in your organization, to say, yeah, sure, and then turn around to the team and take responsibility for two things. One is I failed at presenting my case, but I do believe that I am right. And at Microsoft, we had this expression of, someone would ask you, are you going to put your badge on the table when you make that decision? Meaning, are you ready to get fired or resign if you are wrong? So I put my badge on the table and said, yep, we're going to stop estimating. And I'm going from now on, you don't need to estimate. I will provide a forecast model. So definitely that was a stuntman move.
Good.
All right. So there was one other question from Vikas about CMMI, and I think that's a misunderstanding, Vikas. The Software Engineering Institute influence at Microsoft IT was actually the personal software process, team software process. And a senior VP, a guy who reported directly to Bill Gates called John Devan, guy with a very low employee number, I think he's employee 23 or something like that. He loved the work that was being done at the Software Engineering Institute. He was a big fan of Watts Humphrey. So he wanted the company to experiment with the use of the personal software process, team software process. So he had it mandated in the IT organization. So all the the TCS vendor people had to follow the PSP, TSP, but it wasn't CMMI. But Dragos, I think, mentioned that your group somehow escaped that mandate.
We escaped that mandate, but I didn't. So I was part of this initiative regardless. I just got a kind of a approval that with such a small team, we don't need to do it. However, we've learned a lot from it. We also learned that we spent close to $1.5 million on it. And by the time we are done, we got reworked and all the groups are broken down and end up somewhere else. And we didn't follow it. However, all of us who have been through that experience learned a lot. And I was talking to developers even years later. And that discipline that you get and all that data, I definitely, it impacted how I worked after that. But, was the initiative a success for us as a group? Well, when you get reworked every 6 months or so, I don't know. I don't know what to say to that, right? We never really got to apply it long term to see the results.
So I just want to wrap things up here by saying that, thanks for joining us. And for you guys who have joined today, there is this very special offer for someone brave enough to sign up for the new Kanban Plus Enterprise Transformation Management product. We'll be sending this link to you in the email and the information pack after the class. So obviously you see what we're doing with this. It is aimed at enterprise deployment, and the real value of it is when you're using it with product units, business units, large scale. So we've put together this 50 user license bundle at 80% discount if you sign up between now and the 18th of December. Otherwise, we'll be very happy to talk to you next year about a full-scale license at the full prices. So the link will be in the email. There are two different versions of the bundle. There's the Enterprise Transformation Management Pack for people who want to continue using their crappy old work tracking software that they've already got. And therefore, you need the Kanban Plus Essentials, all of the content that's already there. Our flow metrics software that Eduardo was demoing, and our Evolve software, which is the appraisal tool that some of you will be familiar with. And then there's the Enterprise Delivery Management Pack for those who are brave enough to throw out their crappy old work tracking software and get a real product that will enable them to reach a high maturity level and do something at significant scale. So the Essentials flow boards and flow metrics. And for those of you who really believe in everything we've been doing this last 20 years, there's the Total Pack that has all of it. So please get in touch if you're interested.
Okay.
Eduardo, any closing thoughts to round things out?
Yeah, it's really great to have this moment celebrating 20 years. I already prepared some hat. I don't have a cake here, my limited whip hat. And I think this is that case is really profound in a sense that it seems simple as in size, but it was profound in terms of the mechanics involved, the change management, the fact that it didn't change the development work, but changed the perception of how it was managed. And that pushed the context to adapt around in order to get results. And it was probably the birth of static as well, right? With all the elements. So that's fantastic. And as I said earlier, every time I read and I hear Dragos speaking and telling a little bit of these stories, it enriches the context and the way I teach. So thank you and congratulations. Congratulations for us all.
It's been nice to see everyone, so many well-known names. We didn't get to see the faces today. So thank you all for your time and attention. And it's been great catching up with Dragos. We should do these more often. I never get to talk to you.
Likewise. Yeah, we let's fix that. And hello, Helen. I remember, we met in Istanbul in a train the trainer class. and it was my birthday that week. We drank champagne in Istanbul. David, Helen, a bunch of other people. Actually, someone, yeah.
The Istanbul venue was fantastic. It just became impossible because particularly Americans were scared to travel to Turkey. Man, looking back now, compared to the state the world's in today, that's tame in comparison. Like one protest march in Istanbul and suddenly no one wanted to travel there. But I really missed that venue. That was a great location, and it's a great hub airport, Istanbul. It was so convenient for people all over the world.
Yeah. Well, it was also a 2-hour boat ride after you get off the plane. It was on Lake Sapanca, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It was a great location. All right, well, let's wrap it up. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to Peter, Eduardo, Dragos. Thanks to my team hiding in the background that made all this happen. And we're really excited about 2026 and where we're going with Kanban training, with the Kanban Plus product, and the future of enterprise transformation management. That hopefully we're back here in another 20 years with some great,
hopefully,
some more.
Well,
great
let's plan
stories.
let's plan for 25 first. Small steps.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay.
Bye.
See you.
Nice.
Bye.